So here we're going to begin chapter 11, looking at some basic overviews of evolution. So the diversity of life is a direct result of evolution. Evolution is a continuous process. It's still occurring. Evolution is basically the descent with modification. So just some examples of the diversity of life that we have on the planet now that we did not begin with. So Charles Darwin is the one who is largely credited with the theory of evolution. He is not the only one who had that idea. He is just the one who was the first one published and is best known for his ideas. One of the things that he studied were finches when he was on the Galapagos Island, and he looked at the variations that they would have in their beak shapes. And he postulated the beak of an ancestral species had adapted over time to allow these different types of finches to acquire different food sources. So here's the four beak shapes for the four species of ground finch. So each type of beak is specialized to deal with a different type of food. So this top one here on the left can obviously handle much bigger particles of food than this one here on the bottom right, due to their differences in beak sizes. So on the left is a picture of Charles Darwin, and on the right is Alfred Wallace. He is another one who was involved in studying this. Both wrote papers on natural selection that were presented together before the Linnaean Society in 1858. So a drought on the Galapagos island of Daphne major in 1977 ended up reducing the number of small seeds that was available to finches. This caused a lot of the small-beaked finches to die because they didn't have food. This also caused an increase in the finch's average beak size between 1976 and 1978. So it's just an example of how modern-day events are still influencing evolution. Here we've got a couple of different plants that evolved from a common ancestor. So in plant A, there's the dense blazing star, and in plant B is a purple coneflower. Yet both of them share the same basic morphology. So here's some more examples of evolution that have occurred relatively recently. Here we've got light-colored pepper moths, and they're better camouflaged against a pristine environment, while your dark-colored pepper moths are better camouflaged against a sooty environment. So when we had the Industrial Revolution progress in the 19th century England, this caused a lot of the trees to darken from soot, and the darker-colored pepper moths became better camouflaged than the lighter ones. This caused there to be more of the darker-colored moths in the population. So relatively recently, with the 19th century, changing or shifting the moth population. So one way we can cause genetic changes in a population is through genetic drift. This can lead to the elimination of an allele from a population by chance. So here we've got some rabbits, and these are going to be the 5 rabbits that end up reproducing. And what you can see is when you look at all the possible genetic combinations that you end up with, this is what you have for your second generation. You'll notice that there's only one white rabbit here. Then from the second generation, only 2 of these rabbits are going to go on to produce, and you end up with a third generation where you end up with all brown rabbits. So it was just a chance change of which ones were able to breed and which ones were not that changed the genetics that were passed on for the gene pool into the third generation of rabbits. Another thing that can change the genes that are available for reproduction is something we call the bottleneck effect. And this will happen when there's a chance of catastrophe that reduces the genetic variability in a population. You had a large original population, but with the bottleneck, only a small surviving population was passed on. So some of these variations that were in the original population were not going to make it to go on to breed and pass on those potential genetic varieties. Gene flow is another way of introducing variation. This can occur when an individual travels from one geographic location to another and joins a different population of species. So here it's showing the brown allele is being introduced into the green population. So this can happen very easily with insects today or with other species. You can have them accidentally hop on planes or ships and end up quite a ways away without any of their own doing. Here we have an artist's representation of species that were derived from the fossils of evolutionary history of the horse and its ancestors. So the species depicted here are only 4 from a very diverse lineage that contains many branches, dead ends, and adaptive radiations, but it is a concise picture nonetheless. One of the trends depicted here is the evolutionary tracking of a drying climate and the increase in prairie versus forest habitat, and how it is reflected in the forms that are more adapted to grazing and predator escape through running. So here in a more forested habitat to a more dry habitat where it needs to be better adapted to escape predators and run. So when we look at appendages, this is a way to see evidence of organisms sharing a common ancestor. So when we look, we have the whale here, a bird, a dog, and a human. When you look with the appendages, they all have one large bone at the top, 2 smaller bones partway down, multiple bones that make up the wrist or an ankle, and then you've got your digits or the fingers or toes that you can see in each of these. And they are similar from being derived from a common ancestor. These are some examples of adaptations animals have made to be able to survive in their environment. The Arctic fox here in the snow and the ptarmigan's plumage, both of them are white to deal with being able to hide in snowy environments. Here we have the Proteaceae family of plants. These evolved before the supercontinent Gondwana broke up. So today, members of these plants are found throughout the southern hemisphere. So here is the plant. This was Gondwana for 220 million years ago, where the planets were connected together. And now you can see how they are separated today. So this is one of the reasons why there are such different animals that you can see in South America, Africa, Australia, other parts of the South Pacific than what we experience here in North America or in Europe or Northern Asia. So here we can see some diagrams. The only illustration on Darwin's Origin of the Species is a diagram showing speciation events leading up to biological diversity. The diagram shows similarities to phylogenetic charts that are drawn today. We use the phylogenetic charts to demonstrate those relationships specifically. So over here you can see where they branch off. Some of them branch into dead ends, others continue on. When we look at here today where modern elephants evolved from the Paleomastodon, and that was a species that lived in Egypt 35 to 50 million years ago. So here, some of these are no longer with us, and then you come up and you can see the branches of the African and Asian elephants that are with us today. We can end up with different species because of geographic separation. So here we have a northern spotted owl, and down here in the southern region, a Mexican spotted owl that live in different climates and ecosystems. So this is an example of incipient speciation. Here we see an example of adaptive radiation. Here you have your one original species of bird, your founder species, and these are multiple other species that have evolved from that single bird, all that are going to have their own distinctive characteristics. Another way we can come up with variation is through autoploidy. This results in offspring with two sets of chromosomes. So you start out with a diploid parent and you end up with a polyploid offspring. This is going to result when mitosis is not followed by cytokinesis. This is seen much more commonly in plants than in animals. We do not see this occur in humans. A polyploid will not survive as a human. We don't have any of those that are viable, but there are many examples in the plant world. So this results when two species mate to produce viable offspring. So we have species 1 that's going to produce a normal gamete, species 2 that would make a polyploid gamete. When you have the first mating, some of them are going to be duplicates, some of them are not. So here will be a polyploid gamete and a second mating with a normal gamete to create now your polyploid organism. So 2 matings are necessary to produce viable offspring. So the cichlid fish in Nicaragua here shows evidence of sympatric speciation. This lake was a crater and it is 1,800 years old, but genetic evidence indicates that the lake was only populated 100 years ago by a single population of the cichlid fish. Nevertheless, 2 populations with distinct morphologies and diets now exist in the lake. And so scientists believe these populations may be in an early stage of speciation. So one is a thin-lipped and another one is a thick-lipped. So these fish could possibly evolve into 2 distinct different populations and species in the future.